When Ethan called that morning, his voice had the same steady calm it always did, but I could hear something beneath it. A rough edge, the kind that comes after a breakup you pretend doesn't hurt. He said he didn't need help moving into his new apartment, that he had it handled. But of course I showed up anyway. That's what best friends do, right? We show up, even when the other person swears they're fine. The sun was just starting to climb when I pulled up outside his new place. It was one of those old brick buildings on the quieter end of town, the kind with cracked sidewalks and too many memories hiding in the walls. Ethan was standing by the truck, sleeves rolled up, arms crossed, a soft grin tugging at his mouth when he saw me. "Didn't I say I've got this handled?" he said. "Yeah," I replied, climbing out of the car. "And since when do I listen to you?" He laughed, that low, rumbling laugh I'd missed more than I should have. It hit me then just how long it had been since we'd spent time like this. No crowded bars, no half-drunk conversations, just us. Inside, the apartment was mostly empty, boxes stacked like uneven towers. The smell of new paint mixed with dust and faint traces of coffee. I set my jacket down and started unpacking a few things without asking, and he didn't stop me. "That was us. Words weren't always needed. You sure you're okay?" I asked, glancing at him as he sorted through a pile of books. He shrugged. "Breakups suck, but it was time. She wanted someone who wasn't always working late or avoiding feelings." I smirked. "Ah, yes. The tragic curse of the emotionally unavailable man." He threw a crumpled towel at me, laughing. "Says the guy who once ghosted a girl because she asked what his favorite flower was." I panicked, I said defensively, though I was laughing too. "Who asks that on the third date? Someone who wanted to know if you had a soul? Maybe." We kept teasing each other as we worked, sliding boxes across the floor, arguing over whether his old couch was worth keeping, and pretending we weren't both thinking about the empty space where her things used to be. Every so often I'd catch Ethan zoning out, his hand pausing mid-air, his jaw tightening just enough to show he was thinking of her. Or maybe he wasn't. Maybe he was just tired of feeling too much and saying too little. At one point, I bent to lift a box and felt a hand on my shoulder. Ethan. His grip was steady, firm. "Careful, man. You'll throw your back out," he said. His voice was light, but his hand stayed a beat too long. My pulse kicked up. It was the smallest thing, a friendly touch, but suddenly I felt aware of everything. The warmth of his fingers, the smell of his cologne, the silence stretching between us. I looked up, expecting him to pull away. He didn't. Our eyes met for a second longer than they should have. Then he blinked, stepped back, and cleared his throat. "Box is heavier than it looks," he muttered, turning away. "Right," I said, forcing a laugh. "Good thing I've been hitting the gym once every year or so." He chuckled, and the moment passed, buried under the sound of tape ripping and furniture scraping. But it lingered in me, the way some glances do, quiet but impossible to forget. As the day wore on, I started noticing things. A box tucked under the table that he didn't touch. A small taped-up carton that he carried himself instead of letting me lift. Every time I reached for it, he'd find a reason to move it elsewhere. "What's in there?" I asked casually, nodding toward it. He froze for half a second, then smiled. "Just some personal stuff. You don't want to see my tragic collection of old mixed CDs and bad poetry. Please." "I'd pay to see that," I teased. "You couldn't afford the embarrassment," he shot back, grin tight but genuine. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was in that box mattered more than he wanted to admit. It wasn't just stuff. It was something private, something he didn't want me near. By evening, the apartment was starting to look like a home. The couch sat by the window. The kitchen was half organized, and we were both too tired to lift another thing. We ordered takeout and sat on the floor, surrounded by boxes, eating straight from the containers. The city lights shimmered faintly through the blinds, casting soft patterns across his face. He looked peaceful for the first time that day, leaning back against the wall with his head tilted up. "You know," he said quietly, "it feels weird starting over. Feels like unpacking your life in front of someone and pretending none of it means anything." I nodded. "Yeah, but that's the thing about starting over, isn't it? You find what's still worth keeping." He looked at me then, and for a second I thought he was going to say something, something that might change everything. But instead, he smiled and looked away. We sat there in silence, the kind that wasn't uncomfortable but heavy with things unsaid. I thought I was just helping him move in. I didn't know I was about to move into a truth neither of us had dared to unpack. The next morning, the apartment felt different, softer somehow. The light spilled through the curtains, landing on half-open boxes and empty coffee cups. Ethan was already awake, sitting cross-legged on the floor, sorting through a pile of old photos. He looked peaceful, almost content, his hair still a mess from sleep. "Morning," I said, rubbing my eyes. He looked up with a faint smile. "Hey, hope you don't mind. I started digging through some of these." "Please," I said, grabbing my coffee. "You'd get lost without my superior organizational skills." He raised an eyebrow. "Superior? You just labeled one box miscellaneous memories." "It's efficient," I said with mock pride. "Covers everything from heartbreak to random receipts." He laughed, a quiet, genuine sound that made something flutter in my chest. We spent the morning opening boxes that smelled faintly of old paper and time. There were photos from college, blurry, overexposed shots of parties and road trips. In one picture, we were at the beach, both of us sunburned and grinning, arms thrown around each other's shoulders. I remembered that day vividly, the wind, the salt, the way we'd run into the water like kids who still believed the ocean could fix everything. "You still have this?" I asked, holding up a photo where he was making a ridiculous face, pretending to propose to me with a seashell. He chuckled. "How could I not? That day was legendary. You tried to build a sandcastle and ended up with what looked like a deformed pancake." "Artistic vision," I corrected. "You just didn't get it." "Right, of course, the misunderstood artist." I rolled my eyes, but I couldn't help smiling. He looked at me for a moment, really looked, and I felt the air shift. The teasing faded into something quieter, something that hummed beneath the laughter. We kept digging. There was an old hoodie I'd lent him years ago, gray, faded, still smelling faintly of detergent and memory. When he pulled it out, I felt an odd twist in my chest. "I thought I lost this," I said, half smiling. Ethan glanced up. "You did. I just never gave it back." He tossed it to me and I caught it, running my fingers over the worn fabric. "You could have just told me you liked it." He shrugged, looking down at the next box. "Some things are easier to keep quietly." There it was again, that hint of something in his voice. I didn't know what to call it, but it filled the spaces between us like the dust floating in the sunlight. The next box was filled with smaller items, movie stubs, ticket bracelets, a cracked keychain from our first road trip. I sat cross-legged across from him, holding up each thing like a relic of another life. "Remember this?" I said, showing him a guitar pick. "You said you'd learn to play by the end of that summer." "I learned 3 chords, he said defensively. "Badly," I added. He threw a piece of bubble wrap at me and I burst out laughing. It was easy with him. It always had been. But underneath the laughter, something else pulsed. An awareness that wasn't there before, or maybe had always been, waiting for the right moment to be noticed. We went quiet for a while, the kind of silence that happens when you've said too much without saying anything. "You ever think about how much we've changed?" I asked softly. Ethan looked up from a stack of old notebooks. "Sometimes. Mostly I think about how we haven't." I frowned, curious. "What do you mean?" He hesitated. "You still laugh the same way. Still make coffee too strong. Still pretend you don't care about things that actually get to you." I smiled faintly. "And you still talk like you're describing someone else's feelings instead of your own." That made him look away. He fiddled with a piece of tape, pretending to focus on it. "Maybe I just don't have that much to say." "Liar," I said, half joking. He smiled at that but didn't meet my eyes. After a while, we started talking about old relationships. It was the kind of conversation that used to feel harmless, but now it carried a strange weight. "So," I said, sorting through a stack of old postcards. "You ever figure out why things ended with Maya?" He leaned back, sighing. "She said I wasn't really there. Physically I was, but not emotionally. She wasn't wrong. Do you think you'll ever find the right person?" He looked at me, and for a heartbeat the air felt electric. Maybe I already did. Just bad timing. I froze. His tone was casual, but his eyes weren't. They held something deeper, something that made my stomach flip. Before I could ask, he looked away and reached for another box. "What about you?" he asked quickly. "Still pretending to be fine with being single?" "Who says I'm pretending?" I said, though the words came out too fast. He smirked. "You've been pretending since college. You'd fall for someone halfway, then back out before it got real." I wanted to argue, but he wasn't wrong. Maybe I just never found anyone who made it feel right. Ethan's eyes softened, his voice dropping. "Yeah, I get that." Our hands brushed when we both reached for the same stack of photos. My fingers grazed his knuckles and I didn't pull away. Neither did he. For a second, everything else fell away. The boxes, the clutter, the hum of the fridge. Just that touch. Just the quiet thrum of something that wasn't supposed to be there, but suddenly was. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. Ethan cleared his throat, withdrawing his hand slowly. "We should probably get some lunch," he said, his voice softer now. "Yeah," I murmured. "Good idea." But neither of us moved. He started gathering up loose papers, eyes fixed on the floor, avoiding mine. I noticed his shoulders tense, the way his jaw clenched slightly, like he was fighting a thought he didn't want to have. I sat there, pretending to look at an old photo of us at a Halloween party. He was dressed as a cowboy. I was a vampire. I remembered how he'd wrapped his arm around me that night, laughing into my ear. I remembered how it felt, warm, safe, a little too good, and then it hit me. That warmth wasn't new. It had always been there, quiet but constant, hiding under every joke and every late-night talk. I'd just never dared to look at it for what it was. When I glanced up again, Ethan was already watching me. His expression was unreadable, somewhere between curiosity and fear. As soon as our eyes met, he looked away, pretending to rearrange a stack of magazines that didn't need rearranging. I let out a slow breath, my chest tight with something I couldn't name. Maybe it was the nostalgia. Maybe it was the quiet. Or maybe, after all these years, I was finally seeing what had been right in front of me. The afternoon dragged in that slow, golden way Sundays often do. The boxes that had once filled Ethan's living room were now mostly unpacked, their contents spilling into new corners of his life. We'd made good progress, enough that Ethan finally went to the kitchen to make coffee while I stayed behind to deal with the last pile stacked beside the couch. That's when I saw it again, the small box. The one he'd guarded since yesterday, sat half hidden under a folded blanket, as if even now he didn't want it noticed. For a moment I just stared at it. My rational side told me to leave it alone, but curiosity has a way of sounding like instinct when your heart's already restless. I hesitated. Then I knelt down, brushed off the thin layer of dust and pulled it closer. The tape was already loose on one corner. Maybe he wouldn't mind, I told myself. Maybe it was just old stuff. Maybe. The cardboard gave a soft sigh as I lifted the lid. Inside were photos, hundreds of them. Not random ones, not family portraits or ex-girlfriends, just... My breath caught. There were pictures from college, our first apartment, birthdays, road trips, stupid nights where we'd laughed until sunrise. Photos I barely remembered being taken. In some, he wasn't even looking at the camera. He was looking at me, and beneath the photos, folded carefully, was an envelope with my name written across it. Liam. My stomach dropped. I should have stopped. Every instinct told me this was private, a door I wasn't meant to open. But my fingers moved on their own, tracing the letters, feeling the uneven pressure of ink. The paper had yellowed slightly at the edges. It wasn't new. I unfolded the letter. Liam, if you're ever reading this, it means I wasn't brave enough to say it out loud. I don't know when it happened. Maybe that night we stayed up on the roof, talking until dawn, and you fell asleep mid-sentence. Maybe it was the time you drove 2 hours just to bring me soup when I was sick. Maybe it was every time you laughed and I wanted to be the reason you did. You've always been more than my best friend. You became the measure of every person I tried to love after you. None of them ever felt right because none of them were you. I told myself I could bury it. That friendship was enough. But some nights I catch myself imagining a life where you knew, where maybe you felt the same. And then I hate myself for wanting more because I can't lose you. If I never find the courage to tell you, at least you'll know this. You've been the best part of my life. Ethan, my hands trembled as I lowered the letter. My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear the hum of the fridge in the kitchen. The room tilted slightly, not literally, but in that strange way reality shifts when something you thought you knew suddenly changes shape. Ethan, my best friend, the one constant in my life. He'd been carrying this, me, inside him all these years. My throat tightened. I didn't know what I felt first. Shock, guilt, warmth, confusion. Maybe all of it tangled together. The photos suddenly meant more than they should have. Every laugh, every lingering glance, every casual touch. They weren't accidents. They were pieces of something he'd never said out loud. And the worst part? I wasn't angry. Wasn't even uncomfortable. I was moved. My chest ached in a way that wasn't painful, just unbearably full. I picked up one of the photos, a picture from that beach trip years ago. Ethan had his arm around me, grinning at the camera, and I remembered how natural it had felt, like his hand had always belonged there. I didn't hear him at first. The sound of his footsteps came softly from the kitchen. "Hey," found the mugs. He stopped mid-sentence when I looked up. He was standing in the doorway, 2 mugs in his hands, coffee sloshing dangerously near the rims. His face drained of color. I froze, caught like a thief. The open box sat between us on the floor. The letter lay unfolded in my lap. Neither of us moved. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, thick with everything we hadn't said for years. Ethan's jaw clenched. He set the mugs down on the counter with a small clatter, his hands shaking slightly. His eyes flicked from the photos to the letter, then to me. I can explain, he said finally, but his voice cracked halfway through. I swallowed hard. My own voice felt miles away. "Ethan, how long have you had this?" He let out a soft, humorless laugh. "Too long. I should have thrown it out 100 times." I stood up slowly, holding the letter like it might break. "Why didn't you tell me?" He looked down at the floor. "Because you're you, Liam. And I didn't want to ruin that." The quiet stretched again, filling the room like static. I wanted to say something, anything, but words felt too small for the storm inside me. My mind was racing through years of memories, reassembling them under a new light. The way he'd looked at me, the way he'd never talked much about his girlfriends, the way he'd hesitated when our hands brushed. It all made sense now. He stepped forward, voice low, trembling. "You weren't supposed to find that." The sentence hung in the air, soft but sharp enough to cut through everything. I stared at him, at the man I thought I knew completely. His shoulders were tense, his eyes wide and uncertain, as if he was bracing for the world to collapse. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "I didn't mean to." "I know," he whispered. "It's my fault. I should have gotten rid of it. I just couldn't." His voice cracked on the last word. He turned away, pressing a hand to the back of his neck. "You don't have to say anything. I get it. It's weird. I made things weird." "It's not weird," I said too quickly. My voice surprised both of us. He froze, half-turned toward me, his eyes searching mine for something. Anger, disgust, anything. But I didn't have any of that. All I felt was this strange, aching tenderness. The air between us was trembling, fragile as glass. "Ethan." I started, but the words tangled in my throat. He shook his head. "Don't, Liam, please, let's just pretend you didn't see it." I can't pretend," I said, cutting him off without meaning to. He stared at me then, eyes wide, as if trying to decide whether to hope or to break. The clock ticked softly in the background, and the smell of cooling coffee filled the room. Everything else, the noise from the street, the faint hum of life outside, faded away. I wanted to tell him everything I was feeling, how suddenly everything made sense and nothing did. How maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a tragedy, but the start of something I'd been too blind to see. But all I could manage was a whisper, almost to myself. "I didn't know." He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "Yeah," he said, his voice barely audible. "I never wanted you to." And just like that, the world went still. Ethan didn't move for a long time after those words left his lips. Neither did I. The air between us felt tight, too small for everything that wanted to be said. The open box sat between us on the floor like a confession neither of us could take back. I took a slow breath, trying to steady my voice. "Ethan." He looked up, eyes glassy, jaw tense, like someone bracing for impact. "I'm not angry," I said quietly. "Just confused." That seemed to break something in him. His shoulders slumped, and a small, humorless laugh escaped him. "That makes two of us." He sat down on the couch, hands clasped tightly in his lap. The letter was still in my hand, edges crumpled where my fingers had gripped it too hard. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I asked finally. "All this time?" He rubbed his temples, exhaling shakily. "Because you're my best friend, Liam. You've always been. And I knew what it would do to us if I said anything." He looked up at me, eyes searching. "I didn't want to lose you. I couldn't. But you almost did anyway," I said softly. "You were pulling away. I thought it was your breakup," he nodded. "That's part of it. But it wasn't just about her." That made me pause. "Then what was it about?" He let out a breath, heavy and slow. "It was about pretending," he said. "Pretending I could date, pretend I could move on. Pretend what I felt for you was something I could bury deep enough to forget." The words hit me like waves. Gentle, but relentless. He leaned back, eyes distant. "When I ended things with her, she asked me if there was someone else. I said no, but I was lying. Not because there was someone, but because there wasn't supposed to be. You were never supposed to be the one." Silence. The kind that hums in your ears, heavy and alive. I didn't know what to say. My throat felt dry, my pulse erratic. Every word he spoke peeled away another layer of the friendship I thought I understood. Ethan's voice grew softer. "You were always there, Liam. Every stupid joke, every night we stayed up talking. You were the constant. And somewhere along the line, friendship wasn't enough anymore." He swallowed hard. "So yeah, I loved you. I still do. I just didn't think I had the right to." I couldn't look at him. My chest ached. "You should have told me," I whispered. "I know," his voice cracked. "But tell me, what would you have done if I had?" The question stopped me cold. "Because I didn't have an answer." He smiled faintly, like he already knew. "Exactly." He stood pacing now, hands restless, voice breaking through the quiet like a slow storm. "You were happy. I didn't want to ruin that. I didn't want to make you uncomfortable. I didn't want to be the guy who made things weird." He paused by the window, looking out into the fading evening light. "But lately it's been harder to pretend. Every time you smile, every time you walk into a room, I feel it. I try not to. I really do." He turned to me, his eyes raw and open. "I'll understand if you walk away. Hell, I deserve it. But I needed you to know. Just once I wanted to be honest about what I feel. Even if it means losing you for good." The room spun a little. My mind was racing, but nothing connected. There were too many emotions. Guilt, surprise, warmth, fear. He took a small step closer. "Say something, please." I opened my mouth, but the words caught in my throat. What could I say? That I never noticed? That maybe I did notice, but buried it under friendship because I was afraid to look too closely? I stopped, shaking my head. "I don't know what to say, Ethan. This is a lot." "I know." His voice was barely a whisper. "Take your time. I looked down at the letter again. You wrote that years ago. Have you really been carrying this all this time?" He nodded. "Every day." The weight of those words pressed into me like gravity. I needed air. Without another word, I turned and walked toward the front door. Ethan didn't try to stop me. The evening breeze hit me as soon as I stepped outside. The air was cool, crisp. The kind of air that stung your lungs a little but felt honest. I sank down on the porch steps, hands running through my hair. The letter still clutched in my fist. Behind me, I could hear the faint sounds of the house. The clock ticking, a drawer closing. Ethan's footsteps pacing once before stopping completely. I looked up at the sky. The sun had dipped low, painting the clouds in muted gold and gray. My thoughts wouldn't settle. All those years. All those moments. How many times had he looked at me like that? Like I was something more, and I just laughed, teased, carried on like nothing was there. Was I blind? Or was I afraid of seeing it? I let out a shaky breath, my heart thudding painfully. Because deep down, I knew the answer. Maybe I had seen it. In the way his voice softened when he said my name. In the quiet looks that lingered longer than they should have. Maybe I just told myself it was friendship because it was easier that way. Now the truth was out, and there was no way to go back. The night deepened around me, the stars just starting to appear. I could hear the faint hum of traffic in the distance, a dog barking somewhere down the street. Ordinary sounds in an extraordinary moment. Inside, Ethan was probably sitting alone, regretting everything. And here I was, heart torn between comfort and something terrifyingly new. I leaned back, closing my eyes. For years, I thought I knew what we were. But maybe I'd only ever seen the version that felt safe. Now nothing felt safe. But for the first time, maybe that wasn't a bad thing. I opened my eyes again, staring into the deepening dark. The night didn't offer any answers. Just quiet, endless possibility. And somewhere inside that stillness I realized I wasn't running from him. I was running from myself. The morning light crept softly through the blinds, painting quiet lines across the floorboards. For a long while I just sat there, still on the couch, still dressed in yesterday's clothes, trying to untangle the thoughts that refused to let me sleep. The silence in the apartment was almost eerie. No clinking of mugs, no low hum of Ethan moving around. Just stillness, heavy and knowing. Every memory from the day before replayed in fragments. The letter. His trembling voice, the way his eyes had looked when he said, "I'll understand if you walk away." I hadn't walked far, but I had left him alone with that truth. And now the thought of him sitting there in that silence tore at me. I ran a hand through my hair and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The air still smelled faintly like his cologne and the dust from unpacked boxes. I could almost hear him laughing from years ago. That deep, easy sound that used to make everything feel lighter. And suddenly, it all started fitting together in a way that hurt and healed at once. Every time his hand lingered on my shoulder, every look he gave me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. The way he'd memorize the smallest things about me. How I liked my coffee, how I always forgot my keys. It wasn't new. It had been there all along. I was just too blind or too scared to see it. I remembered every girlfriend I'd had who said I was distant, distracted. They weren't wrong. I just didn't understand why until now. Because somewhere deep down, my heart had already chosen someone else. It just hadn't dared to name him. I stood, heart pounding softly in my chest. The floor creaked under my steps as I moved down the hallway. Ethan's door was half open. Inside, I saw him sitting by the bed, a half-packed duffel bag beside him. He looked up when he heard me, eyes tired, face drawn. He didn't speak. He just gave a faint, polite smile, the kind that hurt more than anger ever could. "Morning," he said quietly. "You're leaving?" I asked. He nodded once. "Figured it'd be easier for both of us if I gave you some space." "You didn't come back last night?" I swallowed hard, stepping further into the room. "Yeah, I needed to think." He gave a small, sad laugh. "That makes sense." For a moment, neither of us said anything. The air between us felt fragile, like the wrong word could shatter it completely. "I read the whole letter," I said softly. "I shouldn't have, but I did." He closed his eyes briefly. "I figured." "It was beautiful," I whispered. "And painful, and honest," he exhaled through his nose. "It wasn't meant to be read. It was just me trying to make peace with something I couldn't have." I took a step closer. "You shouldn't have had to hide something so beautiful." That made him look at me. I really look. His expression flickered, disbelief and hope tangled in the same breath. "Liam." "I mean it," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "All this time, I thought we just had this unspoken thing. You know, the kind that doesn't need to be named. But maybe I just didn't have the courage to name it." He stared at me, eyes searching mine as if afraid to believe what he was hearing. "You don't have to say that just because—" "I'm not saying it out of pity," I cut in. "I'm saying it because I finally see it." I moved closer until I was standing right in front of him. "You've always been there, through every heartbreak, every stupid mistake, every time I didn't know who I was. You were the one thing that made sense." Ethan's throat bobbed as he swallowed. "And now," he whispered. I smiled, small and trembling. "Now I'm realizing that maybe I've loved you too, just in my own clueless way." He let out a shaky laugh that was half relief, half disbelief. "You don't know what that does to me to hear." "Yeah," I said softly. "Then let me show you." He blinked, confused, until I reached up and touched his face. My hand trembled slightly against his cheek, the warmth of his skin grounding me. He closed his eyes, leaning into my touch like it was something he'd dreamed of too many times. "Ethan," I whispered, my voice barely holding steady, "you should have told me sooner." But maybe I needed to grow into the person who could finally understand it. He opened his eyes again, and there was so much emotion there that it felt like the whole room could drown in it. "I was afraid," he said. "Afraid of losing you, of hearing you say you didn't feel the same." "I'm here," I said simply. "And I'm not going anywhere." For a second, he just stared at me, and then something inside him seemed to break open. He reached for my hand, fingers trembling, holding it like it was something fragile. We stood like that, close, unsure, but real. The silence wasn't sharp this time. It was full of possibility. Then slowly he leaned in. Our foreheads brushed first, a soft, hesitant touch that felt like a question and an answer at once. I could feel his breath against my lips, warm and nervous. When I finally closed the space between us, it wasn't perfect. It was trembling, cautious, raw. But it was real. His lips were soft, uncertain, tasting faintly of coffee and confession. I felt the tension in his shoulders melt as I kissed him back. Deeper this time, both of us trying to catch up on all the words we'd never said. When we finally broke apart, his eyes were wet, and so were mine. "Guess I didn't ruin everything after all," he said with a quiet smile. I laughed, brushing my thumb against his cheek. "No, Ethan, you just finally told the truth," he exhaled shakily, pressing his forehead to mine. "So what happens now?" I smiled, a small certain curve of my lips. "Now we unpack. Properly this time." He laughed, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the sound wasn't strained or uncertain. It was free. The morning light washed over us, warm and golden, spilling across the half-unpacked boxes like a quiet blessing. Somewhere in that stillness, surrounded by remnants of old memories and the promise of new ones, I realized that love wasn't something you found. It was something that had been there all along, waiting for you to stop pretending you couldn't see it. And as Ethan's hand slipped into mine again, I knew we were finally ready to stop hiding and start living together. It's strange how quickly a place can start to feel like home once love lives there. A few weeks had passed since that morning, the morning everything changed between Ethan and me. The morning that started with silence and ended with something far more beautiful, truth, finally spoken aloud. Now, when I wake up, there's no heavy quiet, no distance between us, just the soft rhythm of another heartbeat beside mine, steady and familiar. Ethan's new apartment, once filled with boxes and echoes of old heartbreak, has become ours. The walls that used to feel bare now hold photos of us, new ones taken on random afternoons when neither of us expected to laugh so much. The kitchen smells like coffee and cinnamon more often than not. His record player hums in the background most evenings, filling the space with that warm, nostalgic sound that feels like both of us. It isn't perfect. Nothing ever is. We still argue about who left the towels on the bed or whose turn it is to do the dishes. But there's a softness now, even in our disagreements. We talk more, listen better, touch without hesitation. One Saturday morning, I found him in the kitchen wearing one of my t-shirts, one that hung loose on his frame, flipping pancakes while humming off-key. The sunlight coming through the window caught in his hair, and for a second I just stood there, watching him like I was afraid the moment would disappear if I moved. He turned and caught me staring. "You're doing it again," he said, grinning. "Doing what?" "Looking at me like I'm the only thing in the room." "Maybe you are," I said, walking over and stealing a kiss. He laughed, shaking his head. "You're terrible at being subtle, you know that." "I learned from the best," I shot back, pointing to him. We ate breakfast on the couch the way we always did, plates balanced on our knees, TV playing some old rerun neither of us were really watching. There was something about those small, unguarded moments that felt sacred, the kind of peace that doesn't announce itself, but wraps around you quietly. After breakfast, we tackled the last few boxes, the ones still tucked away in the corner of the living room. They weren't heavy, just filled with the sort of things you don't rush to unpack. Half-forgotten trinkets, old books, a few framed photos. Ethan opened one, pulling out a small picture of us from college. both of us sunburnt and grinning stupidly on some hiking trip years ago. The edges were worn, the image slightly faded, but it made my chest ache in the best way. God, we were such idiots, I said, laughing. Speak for yourself, he replied, though his smile betrayed him. He slid the photo into a new frame and placed it on the shelf beside another, one we'd taken last week, holding mugs of coffee and wearing matching flannel shirts. Time had passed, but the laughter in our faces hadn't changed much. Ethan stepped back, tilting his head. There, he said. Then and now. I stood beside him, looking at the two photos side by side, the past and present, both alive in one small corner of our home. It hit me then just how much had changed, not just around us but within us. The walls that once hid his feelings now held the proof of what we'd built together. That night, after dinner, we sat out on the balcony. The city hummed quietly below us, lights flickering like faraway stars. Ethan leaned back against me, his head resting on my shoulder. I wrapped my arms around him, breathing him in. The faint scent of his soap, the warmth of his skin. Do you ever think about how weird it is? I asked softly. He tilted his head. How weird what is? This, us, how it all started with a move. He smiled. You mean how you showed up uninvited and carried half my furniture? Hey, I was being a good friend, he laughed. Yeah, and now you're being a terrible roommate who keeps stealing my t-shirts. Correction, I murmured, kissing the side of his neck. I'm not your roommate. I'm your boyfriend. That word still felt new on my tongue. Sweet, grounding, real. He turned, meeting my eyes. Yeah, he said softly. You are. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The quiet between us wasn't heavy anymore. It was full of belonging. I thought back to that first day, to the boxes, the dust, the uncertainty. I'd thought I was just helping him move on from a breakup, helping him start over. I didn't know I'd be the one starting over too. Not in a new place, but in a new kind of truth. Love hadn't struck like lightning or swept in like a storm. It had been there all along, quiet, patient, waiting in the background of every laugh, every shared glance, every unspoken moment. Sometimes the heart knows long before the mind catches up. Weeks later, I found that same hidden box again while cleaning, the one that had started everything. I hesitated for a second, then opened it. The photos were still there, but this time, I wasn't afraid to look. I flipped through them slowly. Our college smiles, camping trips, birthday parties, all frozen versions of us from before we knew what we were building. At the bottom was the letter, the one I'd read when everything had come crashing down. Only now it didn't feel like a wound. It felt like a beginning. I put the letter back gently, closing the lid. Ethan walked in just then, towel slung over his shoulder, hair still damp from the shower. What are you doing? He asked, glancing at the box. Just revisiting some history, I said. He smiled softly. Good history, I hope. The best, I said. He came over, leaned down and kissed me. A brief, quiet press of lips that felt like a promise. Later that night, as we lay in bed, I traced my fingers along his arm and thought about everything that had brought us here. The fears, the secrets, the waiting, all of it had led to this peace, this belonging. It made me realize something simple, something true. Sometimes, the boxes we fear opening the most are the ones filled with the love we've been waiting for. Ethan stirred slightly, his hand finding mine under the sheets. You still thinking? He murmured sleepily. Always, I whispered. He smiled against my shoulder. Then think about this. Tomorrow we hang the last photo. The one of us at the lake? Yeah, the one where you're pretending you didn't fall in. I laughed softly. That was your fault. Sure it was, he teased, voice fading as he drifted back toward sleep. I watched him for a moment, heart full. The city lights glowed faintly through the window, tracing the shape of his face. Peaceful, content, loved. I closed my eyes, letting the warmth of the moment sink in. Helping him move in had started as a favor, but somewhere between the laughter, the memories, and the unpacked truths, I'd found something I didn't even know I was looking for. He'd unpacked his heart that day, and somehow I found mine in it too.
Thank you so much for taking the time to share your thoughts with us. Your feedback is very valuable and will help us improve. May I kindly ask which country you are joining us from?